Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing. The word legend is tossed around far too much, but I feel very comfortable in using it to describe Bob Davis, a native Kansan who became as synonymous with the University of Kansas and their sports programs as much as anyone this side of James Naismith and Wilt Chamberlain. Bob Davis was the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks for over 30 years. Yes, he had opportunities to go elsewhere to do national things, but in the end, he liked his role as the Jayhawks announcer and in bringing the people of Kansas his excitement and his passion and his level of excellence. He worked his way up the old-fashioned radio way and, in fact, didn't get his dream job at KU until he was almost 40 years old. Starting in 1984, Kansas Jayhawk fans have had the pleasure of hearing Bob Davis call countless great basketball games and many, well, not-so-great football games. But win or lose, the same kind of passion and excellence that he brought to the table was evident game after game after game. He was the 14-time Kansas Broadcaster of the Year, an absurd total. He's a Hall of Famer in many regards, state, local, national, and far more importantly, he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. You'll find that out starting next on Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing. We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, you know, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is "Where Integrity Matters." Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. Are you thinking of starting a new business? Does your current business feel stuck? Or are you just trying to grow what you already have? Running a business is a lot of work, and it takes the right team to make it all happen. If you're looking to grow your business, call my friends Ben and Greg over at Fuego Consulting. They put together a company that can help you reach your business goals. Whether you're looking to get online, build a social media strategy, or rebrand your business, they can help. Call Fuego at 816-663-9695 or visit them online at fuegoconsulting.com. Fuego Consulting. Let's grow your business together. Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Vision's goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Bob, we've been working on getting together for quite a while now. It's a pleasure to finally get to do it, and to sit down with you is a thrill. You've always been somebody who's fun to be around and a mentor of sorts, somebody who can actually tell jokes and make them funny. Most people who tell jokes aren't funny, really. They just tell jokes. Oh. But you're a funny person and a great joke teller. So
well, looks aren't everything.
Those are both of those great things.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And you have one of my favorite lines, which I use over and over and over again when we'd see each other and there was a medium meal and it was maybe less than spectacular, Bob Davis would always say, I say, Bob, how's the food? And you'd say, well, I'm not as hungry as I was before.
Yeah, and I kind of remember that. Yeah.
I used that line many, many times. So it's a pleasure to talk to you. And let's just start out at the beginning. Well, not the very beginning. I was researching you, and I came upon many, many stories, and several of them said you were born in 1945, but one of them said you were born in 1944.
44 would be correct.
Okay, There you go. So it was maybe like a movie star who wanted to take a year off.
I don't know how that happened, but it was 44.
There you go.
My dad was in the Pacific at the time. He didn't see me until I was 18 months old.
Oh, wow.
So it was that stage of our history, but that's where it all started, in Iola, Kansas.
Right. So let's fast forward to when you might start having a few memories, actually. What was it like to be a young 6, 7, 8-year-old Bob Davis in a small town in Kansas? You lived in several different places. Were you still in Iola at that point?
No, we were in Independence, and my dad, at that time, he had sold shoes and worked in a department store, but he became the sports editor of the local newspaper. And he was really a pretty good writer. I've gone to the Historical Society and read a lot of his stuff. And he was able to cover junior college sports because we had Independence Community College, high school sports. Independence High School had great football over those years, and also minor league baseball, Class D, KOM League. And Mickey Mantle played there one year. Bill Verdon was one of my favorites. He played the next year, but I saw a lot of minor league baseball. In fact, all my baseballs in my collection up here, primarily from the KOM League and the Independence Yankees. But that was fun, going to a lot of ball games. And Dad even dabbled in radio a little bit with the station in Independence, did junior college football. So I was kind of around it and thought, hey, this is fun.
Was that the reason that you were a little bit transient? You lived in Independence, Topeka, Manhattan, Hayes. Why did it play out that way?
Well, Dad changed jobs, got in the insurance business, and took a job in Manhattan. We were there a couple of years, my 5th and 6th grade years. So I was a big K-State fan. We could walk to a Hearn Field House in those days. Guys in the neighborhood, little 5th graders, would you do this now? Walk to a Hearn Field House. We could get in for 50 cents. And watch Tex Winter coach Jack Parr and Bob Boozer and all those great teams in massive Hearn Field House. That was really, really a great time.
That does sound like a great time. And what was that? So what, as a youth, were you somebody who participated in sports a lot or just went to games, or what was it like?
Well, I wasn't a great athlete, but I did participate in sports, and I went to a lot of games, and I loved listening. At that time, it was games on the radio, to television. The game of the week was about it. But, I listened to Dev Nelson and all the guys that did doing the K-State games, and all the guys through the years at KU, Merle Harmon and Bill Grigsby and Monty Moore and Tom Hedrick and all those guys, most of whom became friends, and thought, what a great life that would be to cover the games and broadcast. I had a cousin who was in radio. He was a few years older, and he worked in Topeka for a while. He was a rock and roll disc jockey in those days, where they talked like that. And I told him I'd like to get in radio and be a sportscaster. And he said, you're climbing on a dead horse. Well, in the 60s, there was kind of a sports explosion, and broadcasting sports became a pretty good deal. And that's what I decided I wanted to do at a fairly early age, like in 8th grade. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to be a broadcaster and specifically a sportscaster.
So you mentioned your dad switched careers a couple of times.
Yeah.
So what was your relationship like with your parents, and did you have siblings, and where did you stack up in that?
Well, I had one sibling. We were 15 years apart. I was the oldest. My parents always joked that they had 2 only children, which was kind of the case. Unfortunately, we lost my brother to cancer a few years ago. He was my little guy, and we were very close, and it was a really tragic situation. In fact, he got a law degree and was working in state government. His son lives in Toronto, Canada, and is a barrister up there. So it's kind of interesting how that worked out. But Jim was really a great guy. I really miss him even today. But growing up, Mom and Dad, it was just the 3 of us for a long time until Jim arrived, and then I graduated from high school in '62 and went into college, and somehow I got to figure out how this radio thing's going to work, because that's the only thing I'm considering.
Right. When was your dad was it sort of standard 9 to 5, Ozzie and Harriet type of life, or was Dad gone a lot? And did you have to lean on your mom a lot? What was that like?
He sold life insurance for a period of time. I was oftentimes gone in the evening. But, yeah, I guess I hadn't thought of Ozzie and Harriet, but which would I be, David or Ricky? I guess I
don't know.
I couldn't sing like Ricky. I remember Ozzie and Harriet on radio.
Wow.
I was in the generation, and you kind of missed this, where we listened to the radio in the evenings. We didn't have television until the mid-'50s probably, and all those great shows were on the radio. I even listened to the Mutual Game of the Day with Al Helfer, some of those great announcers. So I'm a radio guy. I think a lot of people in the business now, particularly in the sports aspect, are TV people. They grew up with TV, they think TV, but I've always appreciated the radio and the descriptive aspect of that. We have some guys now, I won't name anybody, but we have guys that have only done television.
Right.
And when they get on radio, they say, you don't want to do radio on television. That's too much talking. Well, we've got some guys running around now that do television on radio.
When that really tends to happen is like Westwood One, when they will boil it down from the first round, where they pretty much use guys who are really familiar with radio, Gary Cohen and people like that, and then they want the bigger names. So by the time you get to the regional finals, you get some guys who really have only done television, and you can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the radio aspect to describe where the ball is, who has the ball, what's the score. That was great training. My first radio job, I did like 50 basketball games a year, 20-some football games, and a lot of baseball games as well, plus everything else that you do around a radio and TV station.
Well, you may find this surprising, but I've heard all those. My favorite channel on satellite radio actually is the Old Time Radio channel, and I listen to it all the time. I especially do like the detective stories and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the comedies as much as some other people or the science fiction ones, but I have a great love for radio too, and I grew up in radio stations, so that was great. One thing, when you were finishing up high school, what was the decision-making process as far as where you thought you wanted to go to college, and whether you're weighing other options? You ended up going to Washburn.
I went to Washburn. I was living in Topeka. It was certainly a fine college, and a lot of my friends were there, but it was affordable, and that kind of how that worked out. Washburn had a law school there as well. My dad really wanted me to go to law school. I said my brother got a law degree. I went 1 year. We had draft deferments then. I don't know if you remember that, but my deferment ran out after the 5th year, and I told Dad, Dad, I'm going to get in a reserve unit, and when I get back from basic training and AIT, I'm going to figure this radio thing out, and I'm going to give it a try, because if I don't, I'll always regret it. And so I did, and he said, okay. One of my early football broadcasts was a game in Omaha, Nebraska. Fort Hays played Nebraska, Omaha, and Dad went with me. I said, you can be my spotter. We'll do this. And, because he had a little feel for that and liked ball games. And after we got done with the broadcast, I was wrapping things up, and I turned to him after I said goodbye, and I said, well, what do you think, sports writer? I'm done. And he said, well, I guess this is about right for you. I never knew if that was a compliment or not.
Now, when you first started in researching this at KAYS, is that correct? You really weren't doing any sports. Is that correct? You were doing sort of everything but sports at the start.
I was hired to do a board shift, be a DJ, for 3 hours in the afternoon. I did the noon news on radio, and then I ran TV camera for the 6 o'clock news, and then my best deal, I got to do the 10 o'clock sports. We had a guy who was our sports and news director, and he was really good. He did all the ball games, and he did the news director stuff, and he was looking for another job. I started out there in August, and in late October, mid to late October, he got a job in Lansing, Michigan. So he's leaving. All of a sudden, there's nobody in the station who can do the ball games, and we've got an election coming up. It was the 1968 presidential election. So I got thrown into some stuff. I said, I'd like to try to do the ball game. So that's part of the story. But our guy who was our production manager and kind of assistant news director, he and I did the election coverage. And
coverage, I've done election coverage, and it's kind of like doing sports.
Absolutely. You got winners and losers.
Winners and losers, scores. You have to, basically ad-lib what's the action.
We did it on TV, and we had like 23 minutes in each half hour that CBS covered,
right.
And then we did the other 7, and then we sent it back to Walter Cronkite, and then we do another 23. But it was a big year because 68 It was Nixon and Humphrey,
Right.
big presidential election. Bob Dole, who was from Russell near Hayes, my wife's hometown, he was running for Senate for the first time. Keith Sebelius, who had been a state senator, was running for Dole's first district. And all those guys came through,
Right.
TV station. It was really a learning experience. And to do that election coverage was, being thrown into the deep end of the pool. But it was fun. I loved it.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed it too, and it is kind of like doing sports. You're dealing with numbers and things like that. Well, you just mentioned your wife, and I know that early on when you did now start doing games and everything, she became your statistician and spotter a lot of times.
Very good.
And
did a great job.
So how did you meet in the first place?
It was an interesting deal. She was from Russell, and the guy that was principal of the high school in Hayes, he and I would swap rides driving to road games. And his wife had a friend who knew Linda's family, and they thought, that's how this ought to work. Well, it eventually did. And Linda's dad, he had 3 daughters in their family, so he was a big sports fan, had played baseball as a young man, and that's where that all kind of started. And I had a little thing. Once in a while let her read the stats, and I called the segment "The Spotter Speaks." Which, was really clever, wasn't it? But we had a lot of fun with that, and of course. Our son has no marketable skills either. He's doing the same thing.
Right. At what point during this did you get married young, or did you?
I was 27. She was a few years younger. She would want me to point out.
Right.
Yeah. So 27, and then Stephen came along, and he was born in 90 or 81.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would do this in this college, high school for quite a long time.
Well, you had to figure out, where am I on Friday, and how do I get to the college game on Saturday? Sometimes it's very interesting driving not only around the state but around this general area to cover all that stuff. But I had a blast. I mean, it was so much fun. I got to know so many great people and fun people, many of whom I'm still friends with today. In fact, my last Fort Hays broadcast was an NAIA national championship game at Kemper Arena against Wisconsin Stevens Point, coached by Dick Bennett, whose son is at Virginia, as you probably know. Terry Porter was their star player. He's an NBA head coach now.
Yep.
And it was an overtime game. Bennett played slow down. And Porter had, I think, like 16 points. And we had a kid from who had transferred to Fort Hays from Southern Miss. So he'd been a Division I player. They guarded each other. And Edgar scored 12. And it was a great ball game right down to the end, and national championship. It was just super.
You were in late 30s then, I would say, right about then, or just about 40 years old.
Well, I was 40 when we moved to Lawrence.
Right. So was there any time in that span when you were doing all the high school and college and everything that you thought, I need to be doing something bigger? That you were that there was doubts or thoughts that maybe this isn't enough money, or what were situations like that?
All the time. But the good part was I was doing things I liked and what I wanted to do. But I think anybody that's doing that would like to try it at a little higher level. Like Tom Hedrick used to say, you can be a big leaguer in a small market.
Right.
And I kind of took that to heart. I wanted our games to sound as good as the Big 8 games. It's the same game.
Right.
Now, as you know, at the smaller level, you don't have as much going for you as you do at the so-called major league level, where you have more information you can possibly use. But that's good. And I did a lot of games by myself, which was also another factor. But I loved it, and I was, I had tried a few times on another job. I came in second for the Indiana job, 1973, and the guy that beat me out still has the job, and he's done a great job. We're good friends. Don Fisher's his name.
Right.
And that was an interesting deal. You had worked with Bob Knight, and Lee Corso was their football coach.
Right.
I was, just devastated that I didn't get it, but they hired the right guy, and he's been super. But I always thought, I'd like to do Major League. I did a little minor league baseball in Wichita for a while because our company owned a station down there, so we did the Wichita Arrows, a few games on TV, so that was fun. But sometimes you have to be lucky. Steven's living this dream right now too. He's in his 11th or 12th year in the Texas League, and he did rookie league ball for 3 years, and he loves it. He loves what he's doing. He loves the people he's working for. But he thinks, I could, how you feel
exactly.
I could do this, but you got to got to have somebody believe in you and get a little break once in a while.
No doubt. So tell us the story of how it came to be that you would get the position at Kansas. I know you'd done maybe a game or two filling in, or a few games filling in.
Tom and Max both when they missed. They had different broadcasts
in
those days.
Yeah, for people who don't remember,
That's
actually,
right.
Kansas then would have two broadcast teams doing the game at the same time.
Right.
Like Max did it out of Topeka.
Right, and he also had a station in Ottawa. I think he had two stations.
And Tom did it.
had the
So there were
network.
two broadcasts.
Well, what happened, John Rooney was a good friend of mine and still is. When I was doing Fort Hays, John, for a couple of 3 years, did Pittsburgh State. And we got to be friends over that period of time. And John, at that point, was doing Missouri. And he called me one day, and he said, I'm going to miss a few Missouri basketball games this year. Would your folks let you come down here? It'd be like 12, 13 games, and let you do those broadcasts.
Wow.
I said, well, John, I'd love to do that. Let me talk to them. And they said, sure. That'd be great for you. It'd be games around KMOX, 70 stations across Missouri. Norm's the coach. I mean, it was right after the Stepanovich Sun Gold group, and they were really rolling. So I did those games, and Learfield Communications had the rights, and they were trying to get the rights for Kansas. And they asked me if they did. Tom was looking at some other things at the time, and they said, if we get the Kansas rights, would you be interested? And I said, let me think about that. Yes. and that was how that happened. So, that was kind of a break. Rooney being a friend of mine and did those Missouri games. And, Norm said, this guy coming in from Kansas, we got a hawker doing our games. But he was great. He was really fun. And that was a great experience.
Now you come in to do this, and now there's going to be one broadcast, basically.
Right.
And Max has been doing play-by-play forever. And obviously you're going to kind of be stepping on his toes in some regards. He's going to move to the color role as a non-former player analyst, which is kind of unusual.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe done more then. How did that all shake out? And you guys are both such wonderful people, but still there must have been a little bit of tension at first.
We really got to be close friends, but yet it was a tough role for him because he had never done that, It's like they say about head coach, assistant coach, you moved 12 inches on the bench, but things really changed. But one thing, he knew everybody involved with KU sports. And so he was a great resource. He worked with Fog Allen, knew everybody. And we just kind of worked it out. And we had fun. We worked with Larry, which was an interesting situation, and then Roy, and then, of course, Bill, 3 Hall of Fame coaches in basketball. But, yeah, you hit on a thing. You probably need to read one of Max's books to talk about that. But we became good friends, and we worked together 26 years, I think it was, and we spent most of that time laughing. In fact, Max one time said, we should have gotten married. We've never had an argument.
If you're married, you would have ruined it. So you do step into that role, and you come at really a great time. And I know this personally because I was the student announcer for the last year of Ted Owens, which is really the last time that Kansas wasn't very good at basketball. Ted had some nice years, but certainly the last couple were
2
not.
2 Final Fours.
I always joke, I saw all of the games that would be referred to as the last time Kansas did this, the last time Kansas did that, in a negative way. So you come, basically, did you come right with Larry, first year of Larry, or second year? Larry's
Danny's first year, but Larry's second year.
Yeah. So you step in right when Kansas
timing,
is on the resurgence as well. So that must have been a great time, great thrill.
It was, and Larry was such an interesting personality. Where this guy comes in, he's an absolute national figure. I mean, coaching the NBA, played in the Olympics. He was just different. He was a basketball savant, I always said. I mean, he could take his team and beat yours, and your team beat his, as they say. But he was a genius. Now, off the court, things were a little more scattered, but he was a basketball genius. And it was so much fun to be around him and watch him work. And I'll never forget those 4 years, of course, culminating with Danny and the Miracles.
Right.
Yeah.
So what were the challenges when you're with a basketball savant and maybe his personal life was a little interesting, to say the least, or whatever? We know the stories, but what was that like? What was your relationship like with Larry Brown? Somebody who maybe, were you nervous asking basketball questions? That's things like that, because he, like you say, he's a savant, a genius in his own way.
Not beyond telling Max or me, you're the announcer, I'm the coach. Well, I like that role, fine. But I try to ask him questions and ask him basketball questions. He remembered the inbounds play that the Carolina Cougars ran against the Kentucky Colonels, in the ABA.
Right.
And a lot of people, he just remembers everything. He's got a memory for all the plays that worked. He's a unique guy. He's won at both. How many guys have won at both levels?
Right.
He's won an NBA title. He's won an NCAA title.
And he won a gold medal, I believe, also, didn't he?
Gold medal playing for Hank Iba. He had great stories about playing for Henry Iba. But Larry was unique, and it was fun to be around him. And it was really a pretty smooth transition because Roy came with the North Carolina mentality and what they did. So it was pretty smooth for the players, although he and Larry certainly were different personalities. But I think that was, as it worked out, a really smooth move.
Well, just 4 years into your tenure, obviously, Kansas would win a national championship, and an unlikely one at that.
Oh, my.
And so describe a little bit that season and your feelings during that season, because it was a season, Danny this is the last go-round for him.
Right.
People stayed around then, and, there were very high expectations, and then you got, you're playing a guy who would become a cop later, and then, because they had player defections and injuries and things like that. So the season looked like it wasn't going to be what it was stacked up to be, and it turned out to be that way. That must have been a really wild ride that year.
They were 12-8, I believe, at one stage of the season, and we were thinking, well, maybe we can get in the NIT. Danny had contemplated going out,
right?
And Ed Manning, his dad, said, "No, you're not ready." Well, he was, but he said, "No, you're going to stay another year." Well, they kind of got hot at the end. They had a couple of injuries. They limped into the NCAA tournament. I think they were a 6th seed.
Yep.
And there were a couple of upsets. North Carolina State got upset, Valvano's team, and one of them, maybe it was Pitt. We were in Lincoln for the first stop, and we won those 2 games. And Xavier was in it. And some of the Xavier players had made fun of Lincoln. And so when I thought KU would not be a home team there, but they were. The Nebraska fans really got behind Kansas because they were mad at Xavier. And we won those 2 games. And then we go to Pontiac, Michigan. And K-State was there as well. Mm-hmm. K-State upsets the top seed, Purdue, had a great team. And we beat Vanderbilt with Will Purdue.
Yeah.
And I've talked to the coach at Vanderbilt since then about post defense. I said, "You thought Will could guard Danny, didn't you?" He said, "Well, one of the biggest mistakes ever made. Danny scored 35, I think, in the first half on Will Purdue, and they won that game." And then the next game, K-State, for the right to go to the Final Four, and of all places, Kansas City.
Right.
It was just an unbelievable story. And, K-State had won 2 of the games against KU that year. There was the one in Lawrence, the one in Kansas City. KU was starting a long winning streak in Manhattan at the time, and that was one of those games. It was a tremendous game. And Mitch Richmond was the K-State star, and, of course, Manning. And KU, Scooter Berry had the game of his life, and KU won the ball game.
Right.
And I was always a Lon Kruger fan, but from then on I really was, because Lon showed so much class losing that game. And we had 40-some thousand at that game at the Pontiac Silverdome, most of them from Kansas. And it was just an unbelievable atmosphere. And to win that game and to go to Kansas City the following week, they beat K-State. The last 3 teams to beat KU that season were K-State, Oklahoma, and Duke. Funny thing about that. They beat K-State. Now they're going to go to Kansas City, as it turned out, play Duke and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Remember the T-shirts that said paybacks are a you-know-what?
Right.
Yeah, that was for that.
You're right. And what are your memories of the championship game? This was supposed to be a game that Kansas was supposed to go out and run with Oklahoma, and then it's 50-50 at the half.
On the 50th anniversary of the Final Four.
So tell me your memories of that game.
Well, one of my biggest memories is that Billy Tubbs only played 6 players. And he liked to run, and our guys decided to run the first half. I think Danny talked the guys into that a little bit. And it was an unbelievable game. Milton Newton was off the charts in that ball game. Piper had his usual great defensive game, and Pritchard played well. But Danny was the guy. It was like you had a great coach. You had the best player in the country. You had some things going for you. I mean, Oklahoma was great. That was an awesome team. But they managed to win the game. And, the celebration was sensational. And, wow, I had 4 days at Kemper. This was at Kemper. I mean, it was kind of an odd feeling. But, that was just unbelievable to win that game.
Then, of course, you don't get to enjoy the championship very long because, the coach just decides after various back and forths that he's not going to return. Yeah. And then basically the 11th choice or something for the job is Roy Williams. What were your thoughts during that time?
Jerry Waugh, who's now a real good friend of mine, but at the time, Jerry was a long-time KU coach, assistant. He was Dick Harp's assistant, played for Fogg. He said, the guy we ought to hire is Roy Williams. And because Bob Frederick recommended him and Dick Harp recommended him.
Right.
And like I said, talking about the change from Larry to Roy, it was a very smooth transition. The style of play and probably some of the plays were the same, from the Dean Smith School of Basketball. So they hired him. I think a couple of guys backed off on the job when they found out about the
Gary Williams did.
Gary Williams being one, the impending probation. But that was the only year in my tenure they didn't go to the NCAA tournament. But it was still a fun year. And then the next year, they had a great team again, and Roy had an unbelievable run. He left. He stayed here once and then left. But, Roy was so approachable and so eager. And he obviously became one of the biggest coaches in the country. But he was just old Leroy from Asheville, North Carolina then. But he was fun. And my son's father-in-law here in Lawrence is one of Roy's best friends to this day, yep. Randy Towner, who's a golf pro. And but it was a great experience. And Roy brought in some really good players over the years.
Yes, he did. And there were some people who thought that Roy changed, that the aw shucks thing wasn't, as time went on, not really that realistic. How did you find, what was your relationship like with Roy? And I always got along with Roy fine.
Yeah.
Some other people, in the media really maybe necessarily didn't. They thought he had changed a bit.
Yeah.
You probably would, naturally, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was never what you would say in Roy's close circle, which is fine. I don't need to be with the coach. Right. I need to get along with him, and we did. But he was very interesting, and he had his theory about how to do things, and a lot of it was from Dean Smith, obviously. So how can you fault that? But yeah, he did change. He came from being a kind of a obscure assistant coach at Chapel Hill and emerged as one of the top. He's a Hall of Fame coach now.
Right.
He's won 3 national championships. I think one of his big regrets is he didn't win one at Kansas with some of the guys he had, like Nick and Kirk and Rafe and Paul Pierce and that group. But he grew. I guess we all do as we go, but he stepped into that job, and by golly, he did it.
During this, we've talked all about basketball. Kansas does play football.
Yep.
They haven't often played it well during the time that you broadcast, but there were moments as well during occasional times. For you, what was the transition like? Maybe in years where the football team you knew probably wasn't going to be very good, and there was so much excitement in basketball, but you brought that to the football field too. But it must be a little bit of a juxtaposition at times.
Yeah, and I think you can be good in both. But as you say, KU's been so inconsistent over the years, changing coaches. When they've had a good team, they had a real good quarterback, so you can kind of trace it that way. And the Reesing teams were just fabulous. I'm friends with Mark Mangino to this day. He came to a game last year, and he asked me to sit with him in the suite. It was when they were putting Reesing's number up on the wall. We had a great visit and talked about the good old. He could be tough to be with. I mean, he was a tough guy, but he had a tough job to do, and he got it done. And he gave me some good advice. When he got let go, he said, I was really bitter, and we've all been through those deals. And he said, I decided that bitterness is too hard to carry around, so I dropped it. And I said, thanks. I kind of needed that. But that was great. Mason's had 2 great teams. We went to the Aloha Bowl in Hawaii and beat a good Brigham Young team, and then beat a UCLA team that had about 8 NFL players on it. So we had moments, just not enough of them. But, football is so great, and I'm sure hopeful that Les Miles can find a way to get KU football back where we think it ought to be.
Bob Davis is our guest. It's just an absolute pleasure to sit down with him here, and we'll have more with he's had a day named after him. He's a Hall of Famer, 14-time Kansas Broadcaster of the Year. That's ridiculous. But anyway, we'll visit more with Bob right after this.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
We're visiting with Larry Marshall, former Chiefs defensive back and punt returner, and now a Chiefs ambassador. Larry is a former pro football player with the aches and pains that come with that, and moving on in age as we all are. What do the Canaway CBD products do for you?
It's been a great relief for me. Being a punt and kickoff returner, collisions were a mainstay of my career, and these Canaway products, the salve especially, has really helped me try to get through every day with the aches and pains that I've had over a career of 7+ years in the NFL.
I get similar benefits as well, particularly with my back. Certainly wasn't a football player. What's the best way for our listeners to get more information about the great products themselves?
Well, I'm so enthused about it, Dana. If they just contact me at larrymarshall.canaway.com, and I can give them all the information they need to help them get through the day as well.
Start gaining all the benefits that Larry and I do from the trusted and reliable line of Canaway products. As Larry said, visit larrymarshall.canaway.com and get information on all the great products from Canaway.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
Hey guys, it's Brian Haney, voice of the Jayhawks, and Matt Llewellyn from the 23rd Street Brewery. Matt, I've got a bunch of buddies coming over to watch the big game, and I need some ideas on what to cook.
Hey, let me handle it, Brian.
You're going to come over and cook for us?
For you? Maybe. But you should just let 23rd Street Brewery cater it. We could bring a big pan of Bill Self mac and cheese, wings, veggies, naked nachos, and anything else you might want.
Great. Well, you want to stick around and watch the game?
No, I've got to get back to the brewery and watch it on the big screen.
The place to get great catering and watch all the games, the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Here with Bob Davis, here on our Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing each and every Friday, and a thrill to talk with him. And we do focus a little bit on basketball during the Kansas tenure, naturally. Roy stays, then eventually he does leave, and then Kansas is at a point where they've been so good for so long, they really kind of don't, job search. They just pick a coach, and that's kind of what they did with Bill Self.
Well, and we had all knew Bill. He'd been a graduate assistant on Larry's staff. We all liked him. We saw him play at Oklahoma State. And, I was talking to, I think it was Richard Consom at the time about possibilities, and I said, you got to call Bill Self, see if he'd be interested. He'd only been at Illinois for like 3 years, but he was getting it rolling there.
Right.
I would think,
KU had played them in the tournament.
Right, and got beat, and then beat him the next year. And I thought, find out if he'd be interested. Well, he was, because he knew it and had been here. And gosh, he just had a fabulous run. I'm not sure people realize, they'll dwell on some of those first-round upsets, which is human nature. But Bill's just been a perfect guy in this time. His personality is so good, and, he's very competitive. But it's all cliche, but he's really comfortable in his own skin,
yes,
so to speak. And he's a guy.
Yeah, there was a story. I was at the CBE a few years ago, and this is just the kind of thing that you can't really teach or know. There was a man there, and it was a meet and greet type of thing, and there was a man there who had played for Oral Roberts back when he played for Oklahoma State. And so, it's just 1,000 years ago.
Right.
And so the guy walks up and he starts to introduce himself to
Bill knew him.
Bill, and Bill said, "Hey, you're so-and-so, number 15 or whatever." And the guy just lit up like a Christmas tree. And I mean, it's just like that's what he's like.
He remembers people, and remembers names. And, he still kids Greg Gurley to this day. When they recruited Gurley to go to Oklahoma State, he said, "What I really remember about recruiting you is your mother made the best cookies."
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the type of things that you remember. But with each transition, what is the time? You only had 2 transitions in basketball, but what is it like to create a comfort level with a new person? And does it take some time? Or, I mean, you're obviously a very genial person, so that makes it a lot easier. But what would you say that your attitude towards trying to create a new relationship is?
Well, I didn't make a big deal out of it, but I knew what my job was. And, I wanted Kansas to do well. Obviously, it helps the broadcast. But I didn't want to be Larry's best friend or Roy's best friend or Bill's, although I'd like to think I'm friends of all of them. But I didn't need that. They let me do my thing, and we just had fun with it. Of course, we won a lot, which certainly helps. But there are also along the way some stinging losses. I'll never forget 1997 to Arizona and that team, you know. But that's part of it. You know, It happens it's why it's March Madness, I guess. But, you know, it was a great experience. My son was a basketball manager.
Right.
At one time, Stephen thought he was going to be a basketball coach. And he was 2 years with Roy and 2 with Bill. And I said, this is going to be great. You're going to work with 2 guys who are great coaches who will do things similarly and differently. And you can see how it all works.
Right.
And it was a great experience for him. And both of them were good to work for. But, you know, they're different guys, too. Roy has 2 passions, really, basketball and golf, you know. And there are no bones about that. But it was fun working with all of them.
No question about that. When you now about a few years obviously before this, you get the opportunity to do the Royals. How did that come about?
Well, Paul Splittorff and I had done the pre and post game shows on KMBZ, and Paul and I got to be friends. Interestingly enough, here's this former major league. When I was in Hayes, he came on a caravan to Hayes, and I interviewed him out there and on television. We talked about that a lot. But we got to be friends and friends with our wives and family. And when he was, I forget how it happened with TV, but he worked with Denny Treese on Channel 4, and Denny left, and there was going to be an opening. And he said, you ought to go for that play-by-play job. And I said, well, I don't have a lot of TV experience, but I'd love to do it. And it worked out that I got to do it. In the first few years, we did like 40 games,
right?
Which was a great way to break in, and we had so much fun. And you know, he knew everybody in baseball. I'm going with a guy that knows everybody, and he included me. He introduced me to, you know, all the other baseball guys, so to speak, players, friends of his, and it was just a great situation. And the friendship was part of it, but we really enjoyed it. And he will tell you, you can't now, but he would have, that I taught him a lot about broadcasting. You know, how that all works and comes together. And he wasn't just some old jock doing color. He wanted to be a broadcaster and do it right. And so that was a great thing, too.
One thing that probably makes it a little more of an easy transition in baseball is the fact that baseball television play-by-play is fairly similar to radio play-by-play. You're not going to describe every little thing, but a lot of it is similar.
You bet. Yeah. And I tried to remember that my thinking was the analyst is the star here on television. I got to bring Split in because he had a lot of knowledge. He was articulate, and that helped us too because I was always conscious of him being the guy. I mean, I'm a guy here. I'm telling you the count's 2-1. That was before we put it on the screen all the time. But he really liked that and wanted to do well, and that helped a lot.
You'd be transitioning, however, from a team that was always winning.
Oh, yeah.
and you broadcast literally thousands of losses.
Oh.
The team was no good the entire time you were there. But I think that, you know, when you're maybe at the very beginning, they're okay. But, you know, they a couple glimmers. But I think you approach it, you know, people always ask me that, too, when I would be broadcasting for a team that wasn't any good. Each individual game is
you never
the
know
game,
who's going to win in baseball.
And the game is a game unto itself, and that's really – so that kind of takes away the sting.
Of that every September. Here we are in Chicago. There's 8,000 people. We don't know who's going to win tonight. This might be a heck of a game. That's the way baseball is, and that made it fun. You know, every game was fresh to me. I loved baseball, even though it was some will tell you a daily grind, and if you let it be, it will. In my time of 16 years, I think I had 4 100-loss seasons with the Royals. We had a 19-game losing streak. So there was some, you know, some different managers to deal with. But it was. I wanted to do baseball from day one.
Right.
You know, and I always thought that was the great broadcasting or sportscasting job. Baseball was the one that started it,
right.
You know, play-by-play.
When you, and obviously eventually things happen and you don't end up doing the Royals.
Right.
So when they were going through the couple of seasons where they were great,
right.
How much of that was a little melancholy for you to have done all those losses and you didn't get the reward?
I know, but I can honestly say nobody pulled any harder for the 14 and 15 teams than I did. It was so much fun, and so happy for everybody. There's so many nice people with the Royals over the years, and I was just thrilled for everybody. There's so many nice people associated with that team, the Mike Sweeneys of the world, some of the best people you could ever meet.
When you when that passes and then you're just doing KU at that point in time, did you were there any points along the way before you actually did retire that you thought about it, or was this always something you felt like you would just do for a long, long time?
Well, Linda's situation played
Right.
a role in that. And, even just doing basketball and football, you're gone a lot. And she really needs somebody with her. And so, that's how that came about. But I had a pretty good run. I mean, I did radio and TV play-by-play for 48 years.
That's a long time. That's good.
Yeah, college football and basketball that whole time.
Right.
And then a lot of baseball.
Yeah.
So, I was really lucky.
You were kidding before. We talked to Linda. Obviously has Parkinson's, and you've had to be a caretaker for that. And you said that part of the reason you retired was to be that. But you said that that should give you some nobility. But maybe she would disagree with that.
Well, yeah, that happens.
But so what I wanted to know is that through the years, I know you well, but I know you in a work situation well. I worked with you at KMBZ, and
right.
What did you like to do to get away from broadcasting? I never really knew that. I mean, I don't think you're a golfer, right?
I'm not really. I haven't golfed for several years, which is dumb. I should, but Stephen plays a little, but
right.
I'm not a golfer. I like to read books, history books, and sports books.
Now your degree was in history,
yeah,
and I was a minor in history in college. And did you ever think of using your history degree? You went into law, but you just decided that as you said earlier,
was always the thing, and I wasn't sure how I was going to do it.
Right.
When I got back from Fort Polk, Louisiana, I took some broadcasting courses, and the first job I got was the job in Hayes that I described to you earlier, and then the guy leaves, and I get to do a lot more stuff. But a friend of mine who ran a station in Topeka heard about the opening out there and recommended me for it. And I got it, and the guy, Bob Schmidt, who's gone now, but he was one of, if not the best, certainly one of the best owner-operators Kansas broadcast history. And the radio and TV manager interviewed me, called me a week later, and hired me to do that job, paying me the princely sum of $400 a month. And I was thrilled to death. But Bob told me later, many years later, he said, had I been in town, we wouldn't have hired you, because you were the first guy we hired for a full-time job that didn't have any experience. And
wow.
I thought, wow. But I really worked cheap, so it wasn't too bad a deal.
So I still didn't get to. So do you like to travel? What did you do in off seasons, or what kind of things did that would actually fill up your time when you weren't working full time?
I'm pretty dull, I guess. I like to watch ball games.
There you go.
We didn't travel a lot, particularly after her situation, but we did go. What I told you about the Cooperstown and Springfield,
right?
And the Niagara Falls, the Halls and the Falls. We did make a few trips, and she's been on a lot of trips to Final Fours and basketball and football events.
Right.
So we've kind of done that. Now we're in the grandparent business.
Right.
We have a second grader, a first grader, a 3-year-old, and a 7-month-old.
Well, it sounds
and
like you're
all
busy
precious.
with that. Yes.
Yeah, they're great.
You did get to do some broadcasting for other entities, national-wise.
Mm-hmm.
You did some Westwood One, you did some Final Fours and things like that. But I always get the sense, and in reading about it, I think you've been quoted as saying that it isn't necessarily what you like to do the most, because there is an expectation of being completely unbiased.
I like to care who wins.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
There's a difference between being a homer and impartial.
Right.
I mean, you can do a good job and want KU, Fort Hays, whoever it is, to win, but the other team has good players, and you got to, we've got some great announcers in the Big 12, and we've got a pretty good group. But that's the way I always looked at it. It is the KU network. It's okay if I'm happy that they won.
Right.
But, Wyatt Thompson, same way at K-State. Wyatt and I are good friends.
Right.
Wyatt replaced me in Hayes.
Oh, there
you go. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I did not.
And his first year, they won their second straight NAIA title.
Yeah.
So,
wow, that's a back-to-back. Wyatt and Bob.
Back-to-back, yeah.
Wyatt and Bob. Just anything through the – have you ever – first of all, I don't think you have. Have you thought about writing a book?
Yeah, I have a little bit, but I haven't progressed too much. There's a couple of guys that have written books who have approached me about it. That I always think of Yogi Berra. They asked Yogi if he was going to write a book, and Yogi's great answer was, "Well, it'd be good, but either me or my wife has to be dead first."
I know what he means, because I did write a book, and there's some autobiographical things in it, but I was really nice to everybody in it.
Right.
And so I always joke with my wife. She's always said, "Are you going to maybe write another one, or maybe use some other stories and things like that?"
Story
and I'm like,
to tell.
and I said, the late comedian George Carlin published his autobiography after he was dead.
Wow.
Because he wanted to be able to say everything that he wanted to
And
say.
what you think.
And so that's been my standard joke, I guess, for that. But we're lucky to still have you around.
Well, I've got a pretty good collection of autobiographies of sportscasters.
Yeah, there you go.
From around the country or this part of the country, and I just love reading how they all got started and how they found out doing this or that and how they approached it.
Right. I haven't read a whole bunch of those, but I think I got one of my clues, and one of the articles I read starts off with the amount of times you should give the score.
Right.
And
you can't give it too much.
You can't give it too much. And one of the books I read while I was as a young broadcaster was Mel Allen's book. Uh-huh. And he had it when he did a baseball game. He had an egg timer.
Yeah,
and
I think Red Barber did too.
It was Red Barber. Good correction. Thank you. And he would just get to be empty, and we say, make sure it's time to say the score. And I think that there's a lot of, you'd be listening to the games a lot of time, and it's like 5-6 minutes. I don't know the score. Come on, I picked, I came in here.
You don't have to do it on television.
What your quote was is that nobody has ever been criticized for saying the score too much.
Yeah, you're right. And you can give the score and somebody tune in right afterward.
Right.
Son of a gun, what's the score in the game? And who's playing and yeah.
Right. What is your son has gone into it? I'm a second generation broadcaster also. I don't think I really did it because my dad did it, but who knows? Somebody who can psychoanalyze that. But and your son is living the hardships and the realities of the broadcast business. When you speak to groups or a college class or whatever, I always emphasize the fact that this is not a business, where you're trying to, get rich or whatever. Right. You better love this like a musician loves being a musician. What would be your message?
My first boss said, this is a business, you literally have to love it. Or as my dad would say, the hours aren't good, but there's lots of them. I talk about the importance of the audience and, doing it right and keeping your ego under control. Nobody cares about who you are, really. They want to know how the ball game's going. And I just really enjoyed that. I got to be friends with so many people around the state who I didn't really know. But, radio is so personal. Mm-hmm. I guess maybe TV is too a little bit now. But, one guy with a radio in his car or in the shower or,
right.
How more personal can you get? But, yeah, I just think it's such a wonderful method of communication, particularly the one-on-one aspect. I always learned you got to pick out somebody is listening, broadcast the game for that person. I started out early and somebody told me, don't say hello, everybody. It's not an auditorium full of people. It's hello, and here's where we are, and just talk to that person. It's one-on-one, even if there's 1 million people listening.
I can't think of a better place to stop. That's a brilliant way to conclude our conversation. And, Bob, I consider you I can't say, it's not fair for me to say I'm a friend of yours. We've never even had dinner or anything, but we're friendly acquaintances.
In one of those press rooms, we've never had dinner together?
I don't know. I wasn't as hungry as I was before.
Well, yeah.
But this has been an absolute delight, and thanks for doing it. And,
flattered to be asked.
And much good luck to you.
Thank you.
Bob Davis, joining us on Kansas City Profiles.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.